Alright, so thank you for tuning in to Chomping at the Bit. This is episode number 101. Now, normally I would be talking about the NBA playoffs or NHL playoffs, WNBA season, there's any number of things that I could be talking about in this episode, but something happened a couple of days ago, and the minute it happened and I heard about it, I automatically knew that this episode I was going to use for that. And what I'm talking about is Kyrie Irving, after Game 2 against the Celtics with Brooklyn, was talking to Rachel Nichols of ESPN, and he offered up some information that, people ran with and all this kind of stuff, so I'm going to give my point of view on it. Now, if you didn't hear what he said, so paraphrasing, he basically said that with the series shifting to Boston for games 3 and 4, that he was hoping that he wouldn't get any, subtle racism from fans, and that they would strictly stick to basketball. Basically what he said. Now, the part of that has been kind of downplayed since he spoke was that because towards the end of his statement, he kind of paused and looked over at somebody. And then that person said something faintly in the background. Turns out it was Kevin Durant. And after Kyrie said his thing, and Rachel Nichols actually came with a follow-up question where she asked him somebody if he's experienced racism from fans in Boston, and Kyrie kind of put his hands up in the air, laughed about it, and said he's not the only one, other players know about it. And then Durant from off camera said, everybody in the league knows about it, and they laughed about it. So obviously that led to all the talking heads on ESPN, Fox Sports 1, all that kind of stuff, basically talking about Boston, how it's a racist city, and Kyrie's just shedding light on what people already know about fans in Boston. And like many other times where they bring up this narrative and the same stories over and over, it gets on my nerves. Now, I've said on here before, yes, I live in Atlanta, but I was born and raised in Boston. Boston, first home. Love the city. No people there. So when I hear my city and fellow fans up there being generalized and attacked in a certain way, it annoys me. So nonetheless, same thing happened with this one, because the minute he said it, I already knew what was coming. They're going to talk about what Bill Russell went through. Was it Adam Jones with the Orioles and how he heard somebody at Fenway Park say something to him, that kind of stuff. They're going to bring all that up, which they did. And the thing is, when Kyrie said it, I knew why he said it, because we've seen this from Kyrie. He likes to use the media and manipulate certain narratives that he gives them. When he wants to talk basketball, he talks basketball. When he's struggling or the Nets or something are struggling, then he says there's more important things than basketball, and he doesn't want to talk basketball. So now, because he understands that Celtics fan base, very passionate, very knowledgeable about the sport, and the way that he left and then ducked playing there a couple of times right after he left, he knew that when he first showed up there, and I guess this would have been the first time with actual fans there, he knows the reaction he's going to get. So he's throwing out, racism, all kind of stuff, to try to probably lessen the reaction that he gets, because, he's hoping that he can shame some people into not reacting to him because they don't want to be labeled as a racist, since he's already throwing out there that, fans will boo him only because he's a black athlete. And I think, after he said that, I went to Twitter, and I believe I said that it was like the lazy narrative that he's just hiding behind, which I definitely meant when I tweeted it, but it's just funny to me that. So I guess the main issue I have is when athletes do say stuff about Boston, it's automatically taken as the extreme of, well, what else do you expect from a city like Boston? Even though there's several examples around the country that happen to which they may talk about it for a segment or so, and then the story goes away. But then something happens with Boston, it becomes a national day of, let's talk about Boston's past history and all this kind of stuff. And when Boston fans or just people in Boston feel compelled to try to defend themselves, they aren't taken seriously, because it's seen as the analogy is when a black person confronts a white person for being racist, and then they tell them, I'm not racist because I have a black friend. So then it puts Boston fans in a weird situation where if they defend themselves, then people look at it as, well, you're just defending it because you're a city. And if they stay quiet, then the narrative and the story seems like it gets fortified and continues to grow. And now we've seen it grow to the point where I believe it was yesterday, Marcus Smart was asked a question about it. And actually Jayson Tatum was asked as well, and Brad Stevens. And I mean, what exactly are they going to say to really appease everybody? So with them staying quiet, people were talking about, well, look, none of the current players are defending the city. And then when they did come out and talk, all they could really say is, Marcus Smart basically said, as a player, he would hope that fans would give athletes respect the same way that he hopes to respect fans, which is a great answer. I mean, it is the way it should be. You would hope that all fans would, be respectful of players or their families and all this kind of stuff. Unfortunately, it's not going to be 100% everywhere. So, like I said, understood what Marcus Smart was saying. That was probably the most diplomatic answer. And then Jayson Tatum kind of followed Marcus Smart's line of answering the question. Tatum was a little more, evasive in his answer, where he kind of answered it but didn't want to go too far, and just left it at that. And now, somebody from Boston Sports Radio actually brought up a question that I hadn't even thought about, where because Kyrie, KD are seen as big stars around the league, could their comments be damaging to the Celtics status amongst other players. So we all know that, Danny Ainge has a job to do when it comes to free agents and trades, where if it's a free agent, he has to sell the free agent on going to Boston. And then with trading, he's got to then convince those players that he trades for to maybe extend, a contract or whatever to stay there. So if Durant is correct and that everybody knows about it, is there going to come a point where this narrative is going to hurt the product on the court because the pool of players that Danny Ainge will be able to get will be a much smaller pool than other cities? And I don't even know if there's a correct answer to that. I mean, I guess it could affect some players, but I do think ultimately, if Brad Stevens or down the line some other coaches there, if the coach is seen as competent, players will go. If Tatum and Brown have further developed their game and have become legit stars, then players will play there. I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. Like I said, some players, it may just be that, hey, Kyrie and KD said what they said, I don't want to play there. Boom. Now, another aspect of it is when these stories come out, they, like I said, bring up the same events from the past. I feel like for the most part, they'll talk to people who may not have the deepest ties to the area to talk about it. And my thing is, why don't they talk to a guy like Cedric Maxwell, who I saw on a Boston sports debate show. He went on there and he talked about how, he's been in Boston since the 70s and he loves Boston, and he's actually been to other cities and has experienced way worse racism than anything that he may have experienced in Boston. But none of these national shows, I feel like, at least I haven't seen Cedric Maxwell on any of them to tell his side of the story, because it doesn't fit the narrative that they're trying to push. Kendrick Perkins actually works for ESPN. I saw him on, I believe it was The Jump, and he basically said that Kyrie has to be extra with everything. But then I later saw Perkins on a Boston talk show, and he said that in his 8.5 years of living and playing in Boston, he didn't experience anything. He went back there as a Oklahoma City Thunder player, a Cleveland Cavalier player. He said never experienced anything. Loves it there, all that. So, not to say that these national shows are wrong for bringing up the past. I have zero problems with that. It's just that when they do these stories, bring some balance to it. Talk to guys who, like I said, like Cedric Maxwell, who've been there for 20, 30 years and I guess went through the highs and all the lows with the city. Talk to people like that. I don't need you to bring up person after person who may be based out of New York or LA or something, who just take what Kyrie said, run with it, and then give their opinion based off of that. That's where I have an issue with it. That's where I'm sure frustration comes from other Boston fans. It's just that it seems like whenever stories come out about them, they're left to defend themselves on their own. Even though, since Kyrie has said that, we've seen a few events in the NBA. One, Russell Westbrook hurt his ankle walking down the tunnel to go to the locker room. Fan throws popcorn on him. To my knowledge, I did not see the very next day, people running down this long list of, racist things that happened in Philly. No, they didn't do that at all. They looked at the story. They said the fans should be banned. NBA needs to do something. And they moved on. Probably the worst of anything happened in New York, where a Knicks fan who I believe was pointed out was sitting behind 50 Cent jumped up when Trae Young was standing there waiting to inbound the ball, and I would say spit on him, but from the camera angle I saw, you can't tell if it hit him, if it was near him, whatever. Either way, the act was disgusting. And once again, what are national people just saying? Well, he's a guy who should just be banned from everywhere. Okay. But did they run down any history with what New York's gone through and all this kind of stuff? No. So for other cities, they treat each instance as its own thing. But whenever athlete or anybody brings up, sports, racism experience, boom, it turns into, of course it happened there. Because look how they treated Bill Russell, and he's the greatest champion the city's ever seen. Yes, I get it. But to me, be fair with all these other cities. And then, the other thing I forgot to mention, John Morant, I think it was his dad, just came out and said that when they went to the game in Utah, they were members of, I think, the Utah band. I guess they have a section with a band or something. Didn't know that. But like a member from that group was attacking John Morant's mother, I think. And was saying stuff to her that, the father was talking about was wildly unacceptable and all this kind of stuff. But once again, do we run down the history of Utah? No. And it's not the first time with Utah either. Russell Westbrook had an issue in Utah where I think he was once again walking down the tunnel to go to the locker room. A couple of fans said something to him, and he just lost it. So instead of treating these sports stories as an isolated, let me rephrase that. So stop, treating the sports stories as, if it's not Boston, nobody cares, not interested. Sure, we'll address it, but we'll move on quickly. But then when it is Boston, it's a major story, leading off every show. Every analyst wants to voice their opinion. So that's where the main problem is. But so back to Kyrie. Now, this is the same guy who I believe was the last time he went to the TD Garden. Once again, no fans there, did his whole thing, walk around the court with sage and all this kind of stuff, burning and whatever. And it's just, like I said, this story just absolutely annoys me. And like I said, when he made his comments, I understood exactly what he was trying to do. Change the narrative, hide behind it. Because, like I said before, seen it from him. Team struggling, takes a hiatus, comes back, speaks to the media, or he doesn't, pays fines for it, blah, blah, blah. But now, he's the voice of reason. And somehow in all of this, Durant, I feel like, is getting a complete pass for his reaction to everything, because I don't think I've heard anybody talk about his contribution to this story. And it's just annoying. And another part of it is the notion that in Kyrie's mind, once again, because he made this statement, that, yes, I was there in Boston, told the fans I was coming back, asked them if they wanted him back, he'd be back. The fans went crazy for him, They chanted for him, all this kind of stuff. That somewhere in there, he decides to lay down the groundwork for his departure from Boston. Fans found out about it, already knew about it, and he never addressed it, didn't want to address it. He wanted to move on. But then ultimately, in trying to move on, he brings the story back up again. But I digress on that. So now the stage is set. Game 3 in Boston. I can't remember what the mandates are, but if it's not near full capacity Game 3, I believe it will be for Game 4. And now Kyrie's just trying to put it as, hey fans, I'm just an athlete out here doing my job. So just appreciate my skill and ability and the ease with which I play the game. That's what you need to be recognizing. All that negative stuff, no, you keep that to yourself, because he's made it known that he understands where these fans' intentions are coming from. Because like I said, in his mind, there can't be a singular basketball reason to not like him. It would only have to be because he's a black guy. And now, if he wanted to give examples of stuff that happened, fine. I don't care at that point. That's what you experience. That's what you experience. I can't tell you otherwise. But blanket statements, generalizations, all the kind of stuff, no, that doesn't fly with me. And trying to turn it around on fans and making fans have to make a decision on, can I have a reaction, but I have to pull back on it. I can't go full blown with it, because if I get too rowdy, then it's because I'm racist. Or if I just sit there and don't react in any way, then I guess ultimately Kyrie wins, because then it seems like he dropped knowledge on the fan base, and now they recognize the error of their ways. So for me, I think fans will boom. Every right to boom, no problem. I will say, on the other hand, they can't do what the guy in New York did or the guy in Philly did, because both of those incidents are just straight crossing the line. So if they don't do anything like that, fine. But not to say Kyrie should be ashamed for what he did, but I think it was a weak move, and for all these networks to run with it and all this kind of stuff, it was weak on their part. But for them, they don't care. As long as they get clicks to the story, bring in traffic, they'll feel like they've done their job. And I guess my other thing was probably a question that, since I've been talking about this, you probably thought of. So I'm in TD Garden, and then I'm looking around. Am I supposed to now look at it as, white fans are booing because they're wanting to be racist towards Kyrie? But what about, a black fan who boos in the same way? What's Kyrie's reaction to that part of it? And of course you'll never find out, because after this statement, he probably won't talk about it after Game 3. Probably won't talk about it after Game 4. At that point, if they do ask him anything, he'll say, well, that series is over with. We're moving on. We're trying to get a championship, so I don't want to talk about that. Once again, he has every right to do that. But that card, at least for him, he plays it way too much. I think it's just been diminished to the point where, no. But other athletes, fine. I'm okay with it. And so, yeah. Ultimately, I do think his comments aren't going to change anything because, one, the fans are going to react either way. Take their frustration, throwing some drinks and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, maybe it gets out of hand. But that's an experience that is all over the country. Every stadium you go to, there's an inherent risk that some section in that arena, may have too many adult beverages to drink, and then just lose it out there. So here's the part where I will say, as an athlete, that there has to be something that, that the league does, because the problem in this story is that there are an amount of fans out there who feel like the minute they take their own money, buy that ticket, that it gives them free reign to do and say whatever they want. Of course, majority being that they know that the athletes have to stay on the court at that point. And if they try to pull Malice in the Palace Part 2, then this day and age, things will go down much differently than that did. So, without that threat, what's the incentive for fans to stop acting the way that they act? So, it's on top of all that, Kyrie, you are on the team that's the clear favorite here. Boston's down Jaylen Brown. We're learning that Kemba's got bone bruise or something in his knee, so we don't know what's going to happen with him. And Smart dealt with the calf injury for an extended period of time. All this stuff going on, and I don't know. I could probably go on for hours about this, but I just don't want it to turn into a situation that, Game 3 happens and they boom every time he touches the ball, every time he shoots, all that kind of stuff, that some writer out there, for whichever network you want to pick, takes that as, well, there you go. The city just being the city. Would they act that way towards Gordon Hayward? And I don't know. Since Hayward's left, he hasn't been back either. But it's the same fans that were there for Kevin Garnett, where he gets inducted into the National Basketball Hall of Fame and literally says that he wishes he was in Boston from earlier in his career. So clearly, he likes the fan base, likes the city. We saw Paul Pierce's ups and downs with Boston. I mean, the man almost lost his life in a club in Boston. But from that, he ultimately became a leader in Boston. When he won that title for the Celtics, fans loved it. They cheered for him. A lot of people, depending on what age you are and how much of a Celtics fan you are, some people with that title put Pierce in their, hierarchy of favorite Celtics ever, wherever you decide to put him. That's high praise for a guy. So these athletes need to stop talking in general statements and be specific, or at least as specific as you want to be. But I guess one last thing. Now with all this out there, what what's the Celtics organization supposed to do? How do they get away from this stigma? I think Cedric Maxwell may have had a good point where he said that maybe within that front office, they need more diversity amongst the group. And you know what? Seems like a perfect solution, but I don't know, with it being a Boston issue, will it carry the same weight as if it was done in another city? So that brings us back to step one and what to do in this situation. And I can also already see it where now, because of stuff like this, there's probably going to start the whole rumblings underneath the surface of, Tatum needs to find his way out. Brown needs to find his way out. Smart, when his contract's up, should just leave. What are they staying there for? And I think that's totally unfair for the organization and current players to deal with. So, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Because if you criticize them at this point, you're going to get labeled anyway. So, I guess you might as well just go ahead with it. But, it's just so sad how predictable, a lot of these talking heads and stuff are when it comes to all of this. Why couldn't, a Stephen A or something push back and say, well, you can't even do that because you can't question Kyrie's experiences because they're his experiences. So, because like I said, what he takes as one thing, if I were to sit there and watch the same thing happen, I could say it's probably messed up what happened, but I wouldn't go to that extreme as Kyrie did. So, ultimately, as I said before, I want the fans to feel totally free to boo Kyrie and have no repercussions from it. And then I also want it to be where Durant and Kyrie, or just Kyrie, whatever, for them not to overreact to everything. Because to me, as long as the fans don't do anything like what happened in New York or Philly, fine. Or if there are, people in the crowd being, racist and belligerent, then the fans around them should call him out on it, get security, and get the guy thrown out of the building. Because at this point, certain actions are going to have to be taken to, reverse the course of this narrative that's going to seemingly continue to follow not only the Celtics, but the rest of the city. Because we've seen it with Patriot stories in that, we know the big ones, Spygate, Deflategate, all this kind of stuff. And not to get too far into that, because I could save that for later, but, you have Spygate, yet other coaches say, what they did is what we do all the time. But that stuff didn't get talked about. So once again, in this case, Patriot fans as well as Boston fans felt isolated from the national media again. And then you fast forward to Deflategate, same thing. They made Brady the poster boy for a situation that up to this day is very much incomplete. But in all these people's heads on TV, it's that there was wrongdoing there. And of course he knew what he was doing. And now the narrative just turned into Boston's racist and they cheat. But for some reason, Boston fans, and if you're only a fan of a certain team there or whatever, can't say anything in their own defense. And that's ultimately where I come down with there's a serious problem here. So hopefully the broadcast on Friday doesn't spend the whole night talking about it and, referencing whatever the crowd's reactions are, and then try and turn it into the flow of the broadcast and elicit certain reactions from people. I hope it doesn't spiral out of control to that point. So yeah, ultimately, he said what he said, and knowing him, depending on what happens in Game 3, he's probably not going to address it. He won't answer any questions about it. And then Game 4, if that's ultimately the last game of the series, he'll do the same thing that day. And then, I guess the following day, it'll just be back to normal for him. While fans are sitting there having to answer for stuff, players are probably going to keep getting asked this from now on. And it's just going to be too much. But, yeah, so I think that's a good place to stop on this one. Like I said, this was an episode that I just had to push everything else aside. Had to do it for my Boston people out there. I got your back on this one. I mean, like I said, every city has their fans that get out of hand and go overboard. That's everywhere. But for the most part in these cities, a lot of intelligent fans, legit fans as well. Not the ones who are fans of certain people and jump around their allegiance from team to team. No, that's ridiculous. A lot of them are Boston people just representing their team, or in case of the Patriots, just representing their area. That's another thing as well. Because now New England, all the New England states are just categorized as this one thing. That's their greatest characteristic. That's the only thing that they talk about. So yeah, whenever they do it, I'm gonna have a problem with it. So it probably won't be the last time I do one of these episodes. But like I said, I just had to say that. So thanks for tuning in. And it's your first time. Hopefully you liked this episode. If you did, plenty of other ones for you to go ahead and check out, at least until my next episode comes out. And you can go ahead, hit that subscribe, follow, like, whatever it is. Go ahead and hit that. That way, whenever I do upload episodes, you'll get notified. If you're a fan of the YouTube page, it's my YouTube page, and all these are up there in audio form. Go ahead, hit the notification bell and all that on there as well. So thanks again for tuning in. We'll get back to NBA playoff talk after, as some of the first round series are getting pretty interesting. So I want to talk about that. But if I upload another episode before the end of the weekend, hope you guys enjoy your Memorial Day weekend. Long weekend, off on Monday. Find something to do. And in that, as I say, be safe out there. God bless, of course. And I'll catch you next episode. All right.